I watched my mother's face crumble as she read the messages on her phone, messages I never sent, calling her terrible things I'd never even think. My father wouldn't look at me, his jaw tight with disgust, and my sister was crying in the corner, asking how I could have said such horrible things about our family. This was the moment I realized I'd lost everything and I had no idea how. Let me take you back to where this nightmare actually started. 3 months before everything fell apart. I just ended things with Marcus after 2 years together, and honestly, it felt like the right decision even though it hurt. We'd grown apart, wanted different things, and the fights had become exhausting. The breakup was messy but not dramatic, or at least that's what I thought at the time. Marcus took it harder than I expected, calling me multiple times a day, showing up at my apartment unannounced, sending long emails about how we could fix things. I tried to be kind but firm, telling him I needed space and that we both needed to move on. After a few weeks, the calls stopped, the emails dried up, and I thought maybe he'd finally accepted it. I should have known better than to think it would be that easy. Things seemed normal for about a month after that. I was focusing on work, spending time with friends, trying to rebuild the parts of my life I'd neglected during the relationship. My family and I talked regularly, the usual calls and texts, nothing out of the ordinary. I felt like I was healing, moving forward, becoming myself again. Then one Tuesday afternoon my mom called me, and her voice sounded strange, tight and careful in a way that immediately put me on edge. She asked if everything was okay, if I was feeling alright, if there was anything I wanted to talk about. I told her I was fine, confused by the odd tone in her voice. She paused for a long time before saying she loved me and hanging up. That same week, my sister stopped responding to my texts. My dad's responses became one-word answers when usually he'd send paragraphs. Something was wrong but nobody would tell me what. I felt like I was going crazy, sensing this shift in my family's behavior but having no explanation for it. I tried calling each of them, asking directly if I'd done something to upset them. They all gave vague answers, saying everything was fine, but their voices told a different story. My mom sounded sad, my dad sounded angry, and my sister wouldn't talk to me at all. The confusion was eating me alive. 2 weeks later my aunt called me, which was unusual because we rarely spoke directly. Her voice was cold, accusatory, asking me why I would say such terrible things about my own mother. I had no idea what she was talking about. She told me she'd seen the messages, that everyone had seen them, that I should be ashamed of myself. My stomach dropped. What messages? I demanded to know what she meant, but she just told me to figure it out myself and hung up. I immediately called my mom, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. This time she answered with tears in her voice. She told me about the text messages she'd been receiving from my number for the past 2 weeks. Horrible, cruel messages calling her names, saying I'd always hated her, that she'd been a terrible mother, that I wished she would just disappear from my life. Messages that detailed private family moments, twisting them into something ugly and hateful. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. I would never say those things, never even think them. I loved my mom. We had a good relationship. None of this made any sense. I tried to tell her it wasn't me, that someone must have hacked my phone or something, but even to my own ears it sounded like a desperate excuse. She wanted to believe me, I could hear it in her voice, but the messages were coming from my number, using details only I would know about our family. My dad had received similar messages, and so had my sister, each one specifically crafted to hurt them in the deepest way possible. Someone knew exactly how to destroy my relationships with the people I loved most. I hung up and immediately checked my phone, looking through my sent messages, but there was nothing there. No record of any texts to my family. No evidence that these messages had ever been sent from my device. I checked my email, my social media, everything, but it all looked normal. How was someone sending messages from my number without it showing up on my phone? That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about who would do this to me. Who knew enough about my family to make the messages so personal and devastating? The answer kept circling back to one person, Marcus, but it seemed too crazy, too elaborate, too cruel even for someone bitter about a breakup. The next morning I called my phone carrier, explaining that someone was somehow sending messages from my number without my knowledge. The customer service representative sounded skeptical, but agreed to look into it. She put me on hold for what felt like hours, and when she came back, her tone had changed completely. She told me that my phone had been compromised, that there was software installed on it that was allowing someone else to access and control it remotely. She couldn't tell me who or how, but she confirmed that someone definitely had unauthorized access to my device. My hands went numb as I listened to her explain the technical details. I asked her what I should do, and she recommended I contact the police and a cybersecurity specialist. She also suggested I get a new phone immediately and change all my passwords. I thanked her and hung up, feeling violated in a way I'd never experienced before. Someone had been watching me, reading my messages, accessing my photos, controlling my communications. I went straight to the police station, but the officer I spoke with seemed unsure about what crime had actually been committed. Harassment, maybe. Identity theft. He took a report but didn't seem particularly concerned, suggesting it was probably just a prank and that I should just get a new phone. I left feeling frustrated and helpless. Next, I found a cybersecurity specialist through a friend's recommendation. His name was David Chen, and he worked primarily with corporate espionage cases, but he agreed to look at my situation. I brought my phone to his office that afternoon, explaining everything that had happened with my family and the strange messages. David took my phone and disappeared into his office for over 2 hours. When he came back out, his expression was serious, almost angry. He told me to sit down, that what he'd found was worse than he'd expected. My heart started racing again. He explained that someone had installed incredibly sophisticated spyware on my phone, likely months ago. This wasn't some amateur hack or random malware. This was professional-grade surveillance software that gave the attacker complete access to everything on my device. Messages, calls, photos, emails, my location, even my microphone and camera. The person could read every text I sent and received, listen to my phone calls, watch me through my camera, and most importantly, send messages as me without leaving any trace on my device. They'd been doing this for at least 3 months, possibly longer. David said this level of spyware was expensive and difficult to install, requiring either physical access to the phone or an extremely convincing phishing attack. Felt sick. 3 months ago was right when Marcus and I broke up. I tried to remember if he'd ever had access to my phone during that time. Then it hit me, during one of his last visits to my apartment. I'd left my phone on the counter while I was in the bathroom. He'd been alone with it for maybe 10 minutes. David asked if I had any suspects, and I told him about Marcus. He nodded slowly, saying that vindictive ex-partners were actually one of the most common perpetrators of this type of stalking and harassment. He asked if Marcus had any technical background, and I remembered that he worked in IT support, nothing high level, but he definitely had more tech knowledge than the average person. David told me he could trace the spyware back to whoever installed it, but it would take time and it might not be admissible in court depending on how we obtain the evidence. He also said I should document everything, every message my family received, every interaction, building a case for when we figured out who was behind it. I authorized him to do whatever investigation was necessary. I needed proof, something concrete to show my family that I wasn't losing my mind, that someone was deliberately trying to destroy my life. David said he'd start immediately and would call me as soon as he found anything. I went home and sat in my living room, looking at my phone like it was a poisonous snake. Someone had been watching me for months, reading my most private conversations, seeing my photos, listening to my calls. I felt exposed, vulnerable, violated. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, but David had told me to keep it as evidence. That night I called my mom again. I told her about the spyware, about the investigation, begging her to believe that I hadn't sent those messages. She was quiet for a long time and then she said something that broke my heart. She said she wanted to believe me, but the messages had been so specific, so personal, that it was hard to imagine how anyone else could have written them. I realized then that whoever did this had been studying me, learning my patterns, my speech, my relationships. They'd used months of surveillance to craft the perfect weapon against me. This wasn't just revenge, it was calculated destruction. I felt a cold rage building in my chest. 3 days later, David called me. His voice was tight with excitement and something else, maybe anger. He told me to come to his office immediately, that he'd found something I needed to see. I drove there breaking probably half a dozen traffic laws, my heart pounding the entire way. When I got to his office, David had his laptop open with multiple windows showing technical data I didn't understand. He turned the screen toward me and pointed at a specific section. The spyware had been traced back to a specific IP address, and that IP address belonged to a home internet connection registered under Marcus Williams's name. I stared at the screen, feeling vindicated and furious at the same time. It really was Marcus. My ex-boyfriend had hacked my phone, watched me for months, and then systematically destroyed my relationships with my family using intimate knowledge he'd gained from spying on me. The level of betrayal was staggering. But David wasn't done. He told me there was more, something he'd discovered that made the whole thing even worse. He pulled up another window showing a series of files that had been accessed from my phone. These weren't just text messages. Marcus had been saving screenshots of my private conversations, photos from my camera roll, even recordings of my phone calls. David showed me a folder structure that Marcus had apparently created, organizing everything by category. Family, friends, work, personal. He'd been building a comprehensive file on every aspect of my life. There were hundreds of screenshots, dozens of photos I'd taken, voice memos I'd recorded. It was obsessive, disturbing, and completely illegal. Then David showed me something that made my blood run cold. There was a document, apparently written by Marcus, outlining his entire plan. It detailed exactly how he was going to use the surveillance data to turn my family against me, what messages he would send to whom, which specific painful memories he would exploit. It was all premeditated, carefully planned psychological warfare. The document included notes about my family dynamics, my mom's insecurities, my dad's temper, my sister's sensitivity. Marcus had studied all of us through my phone, learning exactly how to hurt each person in the most effective way. He'd even written drafts of different messages, testing out different approaches before settling on the most devastating versions. This wasn't just revenge for a breakup. This was something darker, more twisted. Marcus had taken rejection and turned it into a mission to completely destroy my life. The document showed he'd planned to continue escalating, potentially ruining my work relationships next, then my friendships, isolating me completely. I was just at the beginning of his plan. I asked David what I should do with this information. He said we had enough evidence to go to the police with a real case now. Illegal surveillance, harassment, identity theft, possibly stalking charges. He'd compiled everything in a format that would be admissible in court, including the technical forensic evidence showing exactly how Marcus had accessed and controlled my phone. But first I needed to show this to my family. They deserved to know the truth, to see exactly what had been done to all of us. David helped me prepare a presentation of the evidence, explaining it in terms non-technical people could understand, making it clear that this was real and provable, not just my word against the messages. I called a family meeting that weekend. My mom, dad, and sister all came to my apartment, though I could tell they were hesitant and uncomfortable. My dad especially looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I set up David's laptop and told them I had something important to show them, something that would explain everything. I started with the phone carrier's confirmation that my device had been compromised. Then I showed them David's forensic report, the spyware details, the IP address trace leading directly to Marcus. I watched their faces change as the implications sank in, disbelief giving way to shock and then anger. When I showed them the document Marcus had written, outlining his plan to destroy my relationships with them, my mother started crying. My sister's hands were shaking. My dad's face turned red with rage. They could see their own names in Marcus's notes, see exactly how he'd studied them through my phone, identified their weaknesses, and exploited them. The worst part was showing them the drafts of the messages Marcus had practiced, the ones he'd rejected for not being cruel enough before settling on the versions he actually sent. They could see his process, his deliberation, how much thought and effort he'd put into psychologically devastating each of them while making it look like it came from me. My mom hugged me tight, apologizing over and over for doubting me. My sister was furious, demanding to know what we were going to do about this. My dad wanted to drive to Marcus's house immediately, which I had to talk him out of. We were going to handle this the right way, through the legal system. That night, my family helped me file a police report with all of David's evidence. This time the police took it seriously. The officer reviewing the case said this was one of the most elaborate stalking and harassment situations he'd seen, and with the documentation we had, they could definitely press charges. But I wanted to confront Marcus first. I needed to see his face when he realized I knew everything, when his elaborate scheme fell apart. David warned me this might not be a good idea, that it could be dangerous, but I didn't care. I'd spent weeks thinking I was losing my mind, watching my family turn against me, and I deserved this confrontation. I arranged to meet Marcus at a coffee shop, texting him from a new phone I'd gotten. I told him I wanted to talk about getting closure, that I'd been thinking about our relationship and wanted to understand what went wrong. He agreed immediately, probably thinking this was his plan working, that he'd successfully isolated and broken me down. When I walked into that coffee shop and saw Marcus sitting there with a slight smile on his face, looking satisfied and confident, I felt a surge of anger so intense I had to pause and breathe. I sat down across from him, and he started with some fake sympathetic speech about how he'd heard I'd been having problems with my family, that breakups could be really destabilizing. I let him talk for a minute, watching him perform concern while probably enjoying the fruits of his psychological torture. Then I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. I told him I knew everything, every single detail of what he'd done. His expression changed instantly, the fake sympathy vanishing, replaced by something colder, more calculating. He tried to play dumb, asking what I was talking about, but I could see the panic in his eyes. I told him about the spyware, about David's investigation, about the IP trace, about the document outlining his entire plan. Marcus's face went pale. He started to stammer, trying different denials, but I just kept listing the evidence we had. I told him about the police report, about the charges being filed, about the lawyer I'd already consulted. I watched his confidence crumble, watched him realize that his clever plan had blown up in his face. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus's expression shifted from panic to anger, and he started yelling at me in the middle of the coffee shop. He said I deserved everything that happened, that I'd humiliated him by ending our relationship, that he'd given me 2 years of his life and I'd thrown it away like garbage. He said the plan was supposed to make me understand how he felt, isolated and alone, with everyone he cared about turning against him. Except that wasn't what happened to him, that was just his fantasy. His projected victimhood justifying his sociopathic behavior. I realized then that Marcus genuinely believed he was the wronged party in this situation. People in the coffee shop were staring now, and the manager was moving toward our table. I stood up, looking down at Marcus, and told him he was going to pay for what he'd done, legally and publicly. I told him everyone would know exactly what kind of person he was, what he was capable of when his ego was bruised. Marcus tried to grab my arm as I turned to leave, but I pulled away. He shouted after me that I'd regret this, that I was making a mistake, that he could make things much worse for me. I didn't look back. Empty threats from someone whose entire scheme had just collapsed were meaningless now. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. Marcus was arrested and charged with multiple crimes: illegal surveillance, identity theft, harassment, stalking. David's evidence was rock solid, and Marcus's own document outlining his plan was particularly damning. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in going easy. My family was incredible through all of this. They felt guilty for doubting me, which I told them wasn't their fault. Marcus had been incredibly manipulative. We actually grew closer through the experience, bonded by having survived his attempt to tear us apart. My mom especially became fiercely protective, attending every court date with me. The story made local news, which was both validating and embarrassing. I gave one interview explaining what had happened, hoping it might help other people recognize the signs of this kind of technological abuse. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people reached out saying they'd experienced similar situations with exes using technology to harass and control them. Marcus eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a trial, receiving 2 years in prison plus probation and mandatory counseling. The judge was particularly harsh, saying Marcus had shown a level of premeditation and psychological cruelty that deserved serious consequences. A restraining order was also put in place, protecting me and my family from any future contact. The whole experience changed me in ways I'm still processing. I'm more cautious now about privacy and security, maybe overly so. I check my phone constantly for signs of compromise. I'm careful about what I share digitally. The violation of having been watched for months, having my most private moments surveilled, that's not something that just goes away. But I also feel stronger in some ways. I survived someone actively trying to destroy my life and relationships. I proved to myself that I could fight back, could uncover the truth, could stand up for myself even when everyone thought I was crazy. That's worth something. My relationship with my family is better than it was even before all this happened. We talk more openly now, we check in on each other regularly, and we have a deeper appreciation for our bonds. Marcus tried to break us apart and ended up bringing us closer together. There's some irony in that. I still think about those weeks when I thought I was losing my mind, when my own family looked at me with suspicion and pain. That feeling of helplessness, of being gaslit on such an elaborate scale, it haunts me sometimes. I wonder how many other people are going through something similar right now, being systematically destroyed by someone with technological access and malicious intent. Dating has been complicated since then. I'm careful, maybe too careful, about letting anyone into my life. I guard my phone like it contains nuclear codes. I look for red flags constantly, probably seeing warning signs in normal behavior. I'm working on this with a therapist, trying to find balance between caution and paranoia. But I also know I did nothing wrong. I ended a relationship that wasn't working, which is a normal, healthy thing to do. Marcus's response was abnormal, criminal, psychotic. His inability to handle rejection doesn't reflect on me or my choices. I have to remind myself of this sometimes when doubt creeps in. The craziest part is that Marcus apparently thought this plan would somehow win me back, or at least that's what some of his early notes suggested. He seemed to believe that by isolating me, by destroying my support system, I'd have nowhere else to turn and would come back to him. The narcissism required to think that way is staggering. I've learned a lot about digital privacy and security since this happened. I've learned about stalkerware, about how common it is for abusive partners to use technology to maintain control. I've learned about encrypted messaging, about phone security, about signs your device might be compromised. Knowledge I wish I'd had earlier but am grateful to have now. My mom sometimes asks if I regret confronting Marcus that day in the coffee shop, if maybe I should have just let the legal system handle everything. I don't regret it. I needed to see his face when he realized I'd beaten him, needed to tell him directly that his plan failed. That moment was for me, for my healing. The support I received from friends throughout this ordeal was incredible. People I'd barely talked to in years reached out when they heard what happened, offering help, sharing their own stories of technological abuse. It made me realize how common this problem is, how many people suffer in silence because they don't know how to prove what's happening to them. David, the cybersecurity specialist, has become a friend. He says my case was one of the most disturbing he's worked on, not because of the technical complexity but because of the psychological cruelty behind it. He's used it as a teaching example in his work, showing people how sophisticated stalkerware can be and how important it is to take digital privacy seriously. I sometimes wonder what Marcus is thinking now, sitting in prison, knowing his elaborate revenge plan not only failed but landed him with a criminal record and jail time. Does he still think he was justified? Does he understand the severity of what he did? Or is he just angry that he got caught? The thing that still gets me is how close he came to succeeding. If I hadn't thought to call my phone carrier, if I hadn't found David, if I hadn't had the resources to investigate what was happening, Marcus might have destroyed my family relationships permanently. The messages were that convincing, that perfectly crafted to hurt. Got lucky. I've been contacted by victim advocacy groups since the trial, asking if I'd be willing to speak about my experience. I've done a few talks at colleges and community centers, explaining the warning signs of technological abuse and encouraging people to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. If my nightmare can prevent someone else's, then maybe there's purpose in it. My sister has become almost militant about digital security now. She checks her devices constantly, uses encrypted everything, and has given all her friends lectures about phone security. I appreciate her taking it seriously, even if she might have overcorrected a bit. At least I know she'll never be vulnerable to this kind of attack. My dad still gets angry when Marcus's name comes up. He wanted to testify at the sentencing hearing about the impact on our family, about the pain of believing his daughter had turned on him, about the guilt he felt for doubting me. The judge allowed it, and my dad's statement was powerful. You could see Marcus flinch as he heard how much damage he'd caused. I've thrown away anything Marcus ever gave me, deleted every photo, every message, every memory I could erase. I needed to purge him from my life completely. Some people think that's extreme, but they didn't live through what he did to me. They didn't feel their reality being manipulated by someone they'd trusted. The hardest part has been forgiving myself for not seeing the warning signs during our relationship. Looking back, there were moments of controlling behavior, little things I dismissed as love or concern. The way he always wanted to know where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. The way he'd get upset if I took too long to respond to messages. Red flags I normalized. I'm more selective about who I trust now, which has both positive and negative effects. I'm better at setting boundaries, better at recognizing controlling behavior, but I'm also sometimes unfairly suspicious of people who don't deserve it. Finding the balance is ongoing work. The community response has been mostly supportive, though there are always people who ask what I did to make Marcus so angry, as if I'm somehow responsible for his criminal behavior. Those questions reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of abuse, this idea that victims must have provoked their abusers. It's frustrating but also motivating, showing how much education is still needed. I've started journaling about the experience, trying to process everything that happened. My therapist suggested it as a way to work through the trauma, to reclaim my narrative from Marcus's twisted version. It's been helpful, forcing me to articulate feelings I'd been avoiding. Sometimes I still check over my shoulder, still feel watched even though I know Marcus is in prison. The paranoia he installed in me through months of secret surveillance doesn't just disappear because the threat is gone. My therapist says this is normal, that it will fade with time, but some days it feels permanent. The legal system worked in my case, which I'm grateful for, but I know that's not always true. I had evidence, resources, support. I was lucky in ways many victims aren't. I think about the people who know something is wrong but can't prove it, who are gaslit and manipulated without the means to fight back. The system failed them. My mom has become an advocate too, joining a support group for family members of stalking victims. She says talking to other parents who've watched their children go through similar ordeals helps her process the guilt she still carries for doubting me. I've told her repeatedly that Marcus fooled everyone, that was the point, but maternal guilt doesn't respond to logic. I've changed jobs since all this happened, partly because my old workplace felt contaminated by the knowledge that Marcus had been reading my work emails, seeing confidential information, potentially interfering with my professional life. Starting fresh somewhere new, somewhere he never touched, has been healing. The question I get asked most often is whether I saw this coming, whether there were signs Marcus was capable of this level of obsession and cruelty. The honest answer is no, or maybe I saw them but didn't understand what they meant. He seemed like a normal guy going through a hard breakup, not someone planning an elaborate technological warfare campaign. I've learned that you can never truly know what someone is capable of when their ego is wounded, when they feel entitled to your time and love and devotion. Marcus felt owed a relationship with me, and when I took that away, he felt justified in taking everything away from me in return. That entitlement is at the heart of so much abuse. There are still days when I'm angry about all of this, angry that I had to spend months of my life fighting to prove my innocence for things I never did, angry that my family had to suffer because someone couldn't handle rejection like an adult. That anger is valid, my therapist says. It's part of processing the trauma. But there are also days when I feel proud of how I handled it, proud that I didn't give up even when it seemed hopeless, proud that I trusted myself enough to keep investigating when everyone else had decided I was the problem. That pride is also valid, also part of healing. The restraining order brings some peace of mind, though I know pieces of paper don't actually stop determined people. Still, it's something, a legal boundary that says Marcus isn't allowed in my life anymore, can't contact me or my family, can't come near any of us. If he violates it, he goes back to prison. I've become something of an unexpected expert on stalkerware and digital abuse, fielding questions from friends and strangers about how to protect themselves. I've learned about app permissions, about security settings, about signs your device might be compromised. Information I share freely, hoping to prevent others from going through what I did. The experience has fundamentally changed how I think about privacy and technology. I used to be casual about apps having access to my location, my contacts, my photos. Now I scrutinize every permission, question every request for access. Some people think I've gone overboard, but they didn't have someone watching their every move for months. My sister asks me sometimes if I think Marcus has learned anything from all this, if prison has changed him or made him understand the severity of what he did. I don't know, and honestly I don't care. What matters is that he can't hurt me anymore, can't hurt my family. Whether he's reformed or just bitter about getting caught is his problem, not mine. The healing process isn't linear. Some days I feel strong and empowered, other days I feel vulnerable and violated. My therapist says this is normal, that trauma recovery moves in waves, not straight lines. I'm learning to be patient with myself, to accept that some scars take time to fade. I've reconnected with old friends who drifted away during my relationship with Marcus, realizing now that he'd been subtly isolating me even then. The phone surveillance was just the culmination of controlling behavior that had been building for months or years. I missed the pattern until it was too late. There's something both terrifying and empowering about having survived someone actively trying to destroy your life. Terrifying because it reveals how vulnerable we all are to technological abuse. How easy it is for someone with basic technical skills and malicious intent to wreak havoc. Empowering because I proved I could fight back and win. The court ordered Marcus to pay restitution for the cybersecurity investigation, the legal fees, the therapy costs. I doubt I'll ever see most of that money, but it's not really about the money anyway. It's about the system acknowledging that what he did caused real, quantifiable damage that deserves compensation. I think about alternate timelines sometimes. What would have happened if I hadn't called my phone carrier, if I hadn't found David, if I just accepted that maybe I was going crazy? Marcus would have kept escalating, kept destroying, until there was nothing left of my life. I came so close to that outcome. The judge at sentencing called Marcus's behavior a betrayal of intimate trust and technological terrorism. Those words stuck with me, validating my experience in a way that felt important. What Marcus did wasn't just creepy or wrong, it was criminal, it was abuse, it was serious enough to deserve serious consequences. I'm dating again now, slowly and carefully. I've been upfront with new partners about what happened, about my heightened awareness around phone security and privacy. Most people are understanding, sympathetic even. The ones who aren't, who think I'm overreacting or paranoid, I don't see again. I trust my instincts now. My family has a new appreciation for digital security too. We use encrypted messaging apps now. We're careful about what we share online. We talk openly about privacy concerns. Marcus inadvertently educated all of us about threats we'd never considered before. Silver lining, I guess. The hardest moments are when I think about how much I trusted Marcus, how I'd given him keys to my apartment, how I'd shared my life with him completely. That trust feels stupid in hindsight, dangerous, though I know it wasn't. You can't live your life suspecting everyone of being a potential stalker. Finding balance between openness and caution is the challenge. I keep David's forensic report and all the evidence in a secure folder, partly for legal reasons but partly as a reminder that I'm not crazy, that what happened was real and documented and proven. On days when doubt creeps in, when I question my memories or my judgment, I look at that evidence and remember the truth. The victim advocacy work I've been doing has been unexpectedly rewarding. Helping other people recognize and escape technological abuse gives me a sense of purpose, turns my nightmare into something productive. Several people have told me my story gave them the courage to investigate their own situations and discover similar abuse. My mom sometimes says she wishes I'd never met Marcus, wishes she could go back and warn me away from that relationship. I understand the impulse, but I don't know if I'd want to erase it even if I could. The person I've become through surviving this experience, the strength I've discovered, the awareness I've gained, those things have value. I still have moments of panic when my phone acts strangely, when an app behaves unexpectedly, when I get a message from an unknown number. The hypervigilance Marcus installed in me through his surveillance probably won't ever fully go away. It's a scar, visible only to me, but permanent. The coffee shop confrontation replays in my mind sometimes. Marcus's face when he realized I knew everything, the panic and anger and desperate denials. That moment of power, of turning the tables on someone who thought he'd gotten away with psychological torture. It was cathartic in a way I didn't expect. I'm glad I did it. I've learned that the legal system, while imperfect, can work when you have evidence and resources and persistence. I'm privileged to have had all three. I think about victims who don't, who know they're being abused but can't prove it, who lack the money for specialists or lawyers. The system fails them, and that failure is systemic and widespread. My dad jokes sometimes that he wants to teach a class on how to spot a psycho ex-boyfriend. Though it's not really funny, it's his way of processing the anger and guilt he still carries. He takes technology much more seriously now. Has become almost as paranoid as me about phone security. I appreciate his solidarity even if it comes from pain. The question that haunts me most is how many other Marcuses are out there right now, surveilling ex-partners, manipulating relationships, destroying lives through technological abuse. The tools are readily available, the technical barrier to entry is low, and the psychological payoff for controlling narcissists is immense. We're facing an epidemic most people don't even know exists. I'm writing a longer account of my experience now, thinking about publishing it, maybe as a book or extended article. My story isn't unique, but it's detailed and documented in ways that could help educate people about the realities of technological stalking. Whether I'll actually follow through on publishing, I'm still deciding. The community college where I spoke last month has invited me back to teach a workshop on digital security and recognizing signs of technological abuse. I'm developing curriculum, gathering resources, trying to figure out how to compress everything I've learned into a useful format. Feels important, meaningful work. Sometimes I wonder what Marcus tells himself about what happened, what narrative he's constructed to make himself the victim in his own story. Abusers are remarkably skilled at reframing their actions, at finding justifications for cruelty. He probably believes he loved me too much, that I drove him to desperate measures, that he was the wrong party all along. The truth is simpler and uglier. Marcus couldn't handle rejection, couldn't accept that I had the right to end our relationship, so he tried to punish me in the most psychologically devastating way he could devise. Everything else, all the rationalizations and justifications, are just window dressing on narcissistic rage. I'm grateful for my family's support through all this, grateful they came back to me once they saw the truth. Not all victims of this kind of manipulation are that lucky. Some families never believe them, never see past the carefully constructed lies. I could have lost them forever, and that thought still terrifies me. The scars from this experience run deeper than I initially realized. I catch myself checking my phone obsessively, looking for signs of compromise that aren't there. I question my judgment constantly, second-guessing decisions because Marcus made me doubt my own sanity for months. Rebuilding that fundamental trust in myself has been harder than I expected. My therapist says I'm experiencing a form of complex trauma, that the sustained psychological manipulation and surveillance created wounds that take time to heal. She's right, but knowing that doesn't make the healing faster. Some days I'm fine, functioning normally, and other days I'm paralyzed by paranoia and anxiety. The online support groups I've joined have been incredibly helpful. Talking to other survivors of technological abuse, people who understand exactly what it feels like to have your reality manipulated through your own devices, creates a sense of solidarity. We share strategies for healing, warning signs to watch for, ways to protect ourselves going forward. I've become almost evangelical about privacy settings and digital security. Friends roll their eyes sometimes when I launch into lectures about app permissions and encryption, but I don't care. If I can prevent even one person from going through what I went through, it's worth being annoying. The prosecutor told me after sentencing that my case had already influenced how they handle technological stalking cases in our jurisdiction. The detailed documentation David provided, the clear timeline of abuse, the paper trail Marcus left with his planning documents, all of it created a template for future prosecutions. Something good coming from something terrible. I still struggle with intimacy, both physical and emotional. The violation of having been watched for months, knowing Marcus saw and heard things meant to be private, it created a barrier I'm still learning to lower. New partners have to be patient with my need for control, my difficulty with vulnerability. Some can't handle it, and I don't blame them. But the ones who stay, who understand that healing isn't linear and trauma has lasting effects, they're worth the risk. I'm learning slowly that not everyone will betray me, that trust is possible even after it's been shattered. It's hard work, uncomfortable work, but necessary. My sister got engaged recently, and during her wedding planning she's been incredibly thoughtful about my triggers. She checks in before posting photos of me online, asks permission before sharing family information, respects my boundaries around digital presence. Her sensitivity means everything to me. The anniversary of discovering the surveillance approaches, and I'm preparing for it to be difficult. My therapist has warned me that anniversaries of traumatic events often trigger emotional responses, even when you think you've moved past them. I'm trying to plan self-care strategies, ways to be gentle with myself when those dates arrive. I've lost some friends through this process, people who couldn't understand why I'm still dwelling on something that happened and got resolved. They don't get that trauma doesn't have an expiration date, that legal resolution doesn't equal emotional healing. Their absence hurts, but it also clarifies who my real support system is. The friends who've stuck around, who check in regularly, who respect my boundaries and triggers, they've become family. I've learned that crisis reveals people's true characters, both the capacity for cruelty like Marcus showed and the capacity for loyalty and love like my real friends demonstrate. My mom and I have grown closer than we've ever been. The shared experience of being manipulated by Marcus, the guilt she carries for doubting me and the forgiveness I had to extend, it created a bond that wasn't there before. We talk almost daily now, real conversations about feelings and fears, not just surface updates. I think about the moment in that coffee shop when Marcus's mask dropped and I saw the rage underneath. That's who he always was, I realize now. He just hid it well during our relationship. The surveillance and harassment weren't anomalies. They were his true nature finally revealed. I'm lucky I got out before he escalated to physical violence. The restraining order expires in a few years, and I'm already dreading that date. What if Marcus comes looking for me then? What if prison made him angrier rather than reformed? My lawyer says I can request an extension, but the idea of him having any kind of access to me again, even theoretical, fills me with dread. I've moved since all this happened, partly for a fresh start and partly for security. My new address is unlisted, my social media is locked down. I've made myself as invisible as possible online. It's exhausting living this way, but the alternative is feeling vulnerable, and I've had enough of that to last a lifetime. The digital forensics field has reached out to me several times, asking if I'd be willing to consult on cases or provide victim perspective for their investigations. I'm considering it, thinking maybe I could help other victims get the same justice I got. Turning pain into purpose seems like the healthiest path forward. Dating apps are complicated now. How do you explain to a potential match that you need to see their social media, verify their identity, maybe even run a background check before meeting? Most people would think that's paranoid or excessive. But I know what motivated men are capable of with technology and malicious intent. I've developed a careful vetting process for new people in my life. Probably seems excessive to others, but it makes me feel safer. I Google people, I check their online presence, I trust my instincts when something feels off. Better to be overcautious than to let another Marcus into my life. The civil suit against Marcus is still pending, separate from the criminal case. My lawyer says we have a strong claim for damages, emotional distress, the cost of the investigation, lost wages from time spent dealing with the aftermath. Whether we'll collect anything meaningful is questionable, but holding him financially accountable matters. I've started speaking at corporate events about cybersecurity and privacy, specifically addressing how personal relationships can become vectors for technological abuse. Companies are starting to recognize that domestic situations can compromise workplace security, and my story provides a vivid example. The speaking fees help cover my ongoing therapy costs. My dad has become almost obsessive about learning technology, determined to understand the tools that were used against his daughter. He's taken online courses in cybersecurity, learned about encryption and surveillance techniques. His way of processing helplessness is through knowledge and control. I understand that impulse completely. The nightmares have decreased in frequency but not intensity. When they come, I'm back in that moment of discovering the surveillance, feeling the walls close in, realizing I've been watched for months. I wake up sweating and panicked, checking my current phone obsessively even though I know rationally it's secure. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. I've had to accept that I'll never get closure in the traditional sense. Marcus will never genuinely apologize or show real remorse. He'll never explain what he was thinking or acknowledge the full scope of damage he caused. The closure has to come from within me, from accepting what happened and choosing to move forward anyway. The meditation and mindfulness practices my therapist recommended have been surprisingly helpful. Learning to sit with anxiety without trying to fix it, to observe intrusive thoughts without engaging them, to ground myself in the present moment, these skills have become essential tools for managing trauma responses. I wonder sometimes if I'll ever feel truly safe again, if the hypervigilance will ever fully fade. My therapist says maybe not completely, that what I experienced was severe enough that some level of increased awareness might be permanent. Learning to live with that reality without letting it control me is the work. The small victories matter more now. A week without nightmares. A date that doesn't trigger panic. A day when I don't check over my shoulder. These incremental improvements add up, creating momentum toward healing even when the destination seems impossibly far away. My story has been shared in online forums and support groups, apparently helping other victims recognize their own situations. I get messages regularly from people thanking me for speaking out, saying my experience gave them language for what they were going through. Those messages make the vulnerability of sharing worthwhile. The justice system worked for me in ways it doesn't for many victims. I had resources, support, undeniable evidence, and a prosecutor who took the case seriously. I'm aware of my privilege in this situation, aware that countless others suffer similar or worse abuse without ever seeing their abusers held accountable. That awareness drives my advocacy work. I've learned to celebrate the fact that I survived, that I fought back, that I refused to let Marcus's twisted plan succeed. Some days that's enough, that simple fact of survival and resistance. Other days I want more, want to feel healed and whole and unburdened by what happened. I'm learning that both feelings can coexist. The relationship I'm building now with someone new is different from anything I've experienced before. They know everything about what happened with Marcus, and they're patient with my triggers and boundaries. We're taking things slowly, building trust brick by brick. It's terrifying and hopeful in equal measure. My family has implemented new security measures across the board. We use password managers, two-factor authentication, encrypted messaging. We're careful about what we share online and who has access to our devices. Marcus inadvertently made all of us more security conscious, though obviously we would have preferred to learn these lessons differently. The court-ordered counseling Marcus has to complete as part of his sentence feels insufficient given the severity of his actions. A few therapy sessions aren't going to fundamentally change someone capable of planning and executing that kind of psychological warfare. But it's something, a recognition that his behavior stemmed from deeper issues requiring intervention. I've accepted that some people will never understand the severity of what I went through. Technological abuse doesn't leave physical scars, doesn't fit neat narratives about violence and victimhood. Explaining it requires education about technology and psychology that many people don't have. I've stopped trying to convince skeptics and focus instead on people who get it. The book I'm writing about this experience has become a form of therapy in itself. Organizing the chaos of what happened into a coherent narrative, analyzing the patterns and warning signs, extracting lessons that might help others, it's given me a sense of control over a story that once felt completely out of my hands. Publishers have expressed interest, which is both validating and terrifying. Making my trauma public on that scale feels vulnerable in ways I'm still processing. But if it helps even one person recognize and escape technological abuse, if it prompts better laws or more awareness, then maybe the vulnerability is worth it. My sister asks me sometimes if I think I'll ever be able to fully trust someone again. The honest answer is I don't know. I'm trying, taking risks on new relationships, but there's always a part of me holding back, protecting myself. Maybe that's just wisdom now rather than trauma. Maybe some caution is healthy after learning what I've learned. The support groups have taught me that there's no timeline for healing, no point at which I should be over it already. Trauma recovery is individual and non-linear. Some people heal faster, some slower, some carry scars forever. All of those outcomes are valid and deserve respect rather than judgment. I've started volunteering with a domestic violence organization, specifically focusing on technological abuse awareness and prevention, teaching people to recognize stalkerware, to secure their devices, to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. It feels like the most direct way to turn my experience into something protective for others. The police detective who worked my case has stayed in touch, sometimes consulting me on other technological stalking cases. I've become an informal expert by necessity, learning the landscape of surveillance tools and countermeasures. It's strange to have expertise born from victimization, but I'm using it productively. Marcus's family reached out once through a lawyer, suggesting I was exaggerating what happened and that their son was a good person who made a mistake. I didn't respond. They didn't live through months of systematic psychological torture, didn't watch their family relationships crumble under orchestrated lies. Their denial of reality isn't my problem to solve. The hardest part of advocacy work is hearing other people's stories and recognizing variations of my own experience. The tools differ, the specific tactics vary, but the core pattern, controlling partner uses technology to maintain surveillance and inflict psychological harm, that pattern repeats endlessly. We're facing an epidemic most people don't recognize yet. I've learned to appreciate the present moment in ways I couldn't before. When I'm having coffee with my mom, when I'm laughing with friends, when I'm safe and surrounded by people I trust, I try to stay fully present rather than catastrophizing about future threats. Mindfulness as survival strategy, as defiance against the fear Marcus installed in me. The anger comes and goes in waves. Some days I'm philosophical about what happened, seeing it as a terrible experience that taught me important lessons. Other days I'm furious that Marcus gets to go on living after trying to destroy my life, furious at the injustice of trauma that never fully heals. Both responses are valid. My therapist says I'm doing remarkably well considering the severity of what I experienced. I don't always feel remarkable, mostly I feel like I'm barely holding it together, but I trust her assessment. Maybe healing always feels inadequate from the inside while appearing impressive from the outside. The restraining order is both comforting and a reminder of ongoing threat. It exists because Marcus is dangerous, because legal barriers are necessary to keep him away from me. I'm grateful for the protection and resentful that I need it in the first place. Another contradiction I've learned to hold. Friends who've known me since before Marcus comment sometimes on how I've changed, usually meaning I'm more guarded, more cautious, more aware of threats. I don't disagree with their assessment. I've changed. Trauma changes people. Whether those changes are permanent or will soften over time, I can't know yet. Have you ever had someone you trusted completely turn into your worst nightmare? Have you ever questioned your own sanity because someone was manipulating your reality so skillfully? What would you do if you discovered someone had been watching your every move for months, using your own device against you?